Hello everyone and welcome back to the third lesson in the Intermediate Android Development series here on AcademiCode. In this episode we're going to be talking about how to manage your save states in Android so that your application will function as expected throughout the typical application lifecycle on the Android operating system. So, just to specifically talk about what we're going to discuss today, first, we're going to understand what activity states are and why you need to worry about saving states. And then we're going to transition into when you should save states, when it's necessary and when it's not. And we're going to transition into how you should save your states at a high level. And then we're going to dive into the details in our activity for saving an activity state at the end of the video here. So just to kick things off, we need to talk about what an activity state is. And simply, an activity state is a set of data that defines an activity at a particular point in time. So, for example, at this point in time, in this image that you see here in the middle of the screen, this activity has certain elements that define the activity, and that comprises the activity state. So each view in an activity has its own set of attributes which contribute to that state as well. So the visibility of the buttons, the rotation of different views, even the state of the visibility of the activity itself, they're all comprised into the activity state, all those variables. And I want to transition now to why you need to save the state, and it's kind of complex. It's not really an intuitive reason, but occasionally, if the user doesn't have your application in focus, meaning they're using another application and yours is just running in the background or just not running at all because it's been paused, the Android operating system might take some of the resources allocated for your application and distribute them to the application which is in focus if it requires a lot of, let's say it's a very graphics intensive application and needs those resources. So it's going to take the state variables for your activity and write them to the SD card momentarily, and then pull them back in when the user resumes using your application, or destroy them when the user closes out of your application. So you want to make sure that the state of the activity is consistent across that entire experience, even if the Android OS decides to randomly destroy some of the resources associated with your activity. So that's why we have to do it, and I want to transition now to when we have to do it. So you should save a state when you have any kind of supplementary information embedded in an activity. Typically, activities will have views associated with them and a lot of kind of boilerplate information that's just inherent to an activity. And fortunately, the Android operating system will store all of that for you. It will save all that information. But let's say you also had a player score embedded in your activity if you were making a game, or if you were capturing the action trends that a user had exhibited as they moved through your activity. Or let's just say you were capturing some account info to log them in to a different activity. This is all supplementary information, not directly related to views or other basic components of an activity, that helps define the current state of that activity. That information needs to be saved manually by the developer just to make sure that it's available when the user returns to the application if it happens to have been destroyed earlier. So this is when you should save state, if you have some sort of set of variables that help define the activity but aren't directly related to any of the Android components in that activity. If that's the case, then we will need to save the state. So how do you save the state? Well, let's just think of the application now in its normal state, application running. This is the users using the application, everything's going great. However, the user navigates away from your application and starts doing something else, and the application gets temporarily destroyed to sanction some of the resources for the activity which is currently in focus. At that point, we will jump through on-save instance state. The resources will be saved to the SD card, And then when the user resumes the application, we'll jump through onCreate again to get back to the application running state. And these are the two callbacks that we're going to use to load and save our supplemental variables. So in onSave instance state, you would save your player score, and then in onCreate, you would load your player score back into the class variable so it could be used and remembered for use throughout the application. It's important to note that when the user explicitly closes your application by pressing back on the first activity or forcing your application to quit through their system menus, you don't need to worry about saving the state typically, because the user has explicitly ended the activity and they have no interest in saving those variables. Now, of course, if you wanted to save those variables for additional purposes, you'd have to consider that. However, within the context of this presentation here, I'm talking about variables that help to facilitate the application normally, that you don't need to store. So you just want to quickly pull them in and out of bundles in the save state. So now that we know how to do it at a high level, I'm going to dive into an activity where we are going to save our activity state in Eclipse. So in Eclipse here, we have a simple application that we created for this demo here, which is just has one activity, a dialog activity with an edit text field and 2 buttons. This would simulate a simple login screen for an activity that maybe uses some web-based components. So this is what it's going to look like when we run our application, and we have various different XML components, but the main meat of this is going to be inside main.java. So first of all, I want to talk about this single variable that we're going to be saving to preserve the state of our application, and that's profile ID. Everything else is really just things we've seen before, buttons, views, the like. But we have profile ID, which is just an int. It's not any kind of special Android component, so we will have to worry about saving this in our save instance state. So let's quickly go over what the buttons do. I have the method onClick down here. And in onClick, if we are talking about button 1, this is the button that logs in the user. It's this one here. Login, as you can see, is button 1. So when that one's clicked, we simply assign, well, we extract the string, the user's name, from the edit text field, and then create a simple hash of that name and assign it as the profile ID. We'd probably use this to generate some sort of custom user experience and customize the app to that user's profile ID. But again, this is a bad practice. Users should have really their own IDs stored in a database somewhere, but this is simply a demo. And then after we've stored the name, we simply toast to the user that they've been logged in with their profile name and their profile ID. However, when a user clicks on button 2, meaning they have clicked the What's My Profile ID button, we're simply going to tell them what their profile ID is. So it's fairly straightforward what the buttons do. The functionality that's new here is in the save instance state methods. So we'll go right to onSave instance state, which is up here. And you'll see we have this thing called a bundle. Bundles are how Android manages states. They're very similar to extras that get passed with intents. So bundles contain a map where you can place different variables that you want to save, these variables defining your activity. So we always call the super method first. This is the method that saves all the Android views, so you don't have to worry about it. And then we call this method putInt, which allows us to place an int and associate it with a specific key. We'll just put the profile ID in there with the profile ID key, which if we scroll up to the top, it's simply tag_profile ID. Just a public string used to access the profile ID. And then we simply print out to the console that the activity instance state was saved. So after we have saved the instance state, we need to retrieve it somehow, and that's done in onCreate. After we initialize the views and do all the boilerplate code stuff, we simply come down here, we check to make sure that the instance state is not null, and we also check to make sure that we actually want to use enable state save. That's actually a variable I implemented here just so that I could turn the functionality off and on. It's not a requirement. But we do need to check to see if the instance state is null or not. Because if there's no state, if there's no bundle, meaning the user starts the activity for the first time, it'll be null. So we need to check that. But if it's not null, we simply pull the profile ID from the int which we stored earlier in the out bundle, and we navigate to that int using the same tag, profile ID. Otherwise, we set the profile ID to -1. So now we're going to go through and demo the application. I've got the emulator here in the lower right, and we're going to first minimize this, and we're going to run understanding save states. I've made a filter here which is just going to show us all the system outputs that we'll need. And I'm going to go ahead, and I already had my name in there, but I'm going to type it again and log into the application. You'll see I have a profile ID, and if I click what's my profile ID, it will give me that number. So when I click home here, you'll see that the instance state was saved. It was saved in case perhaps the system destroys resources. So let's go ahead and simulate the Android OS destroying our application by opening another application and pretending like we're not interested in going back to the understanding save states application. We'll open Messenger here, and you'll see in the system output, activity was temporarily destroyed to free resources. So we'll go home and we'll navigate back to understanding save states, and you'll see that the name is still there. That's because the edit text state is saved automatically when we call that the super method in onSave instance state right here. But when we click what's my profile ID, you'll see it's -1 now. That's because we didn't save the profile ID because we turned off save states. So let's change that to true, and we'll go home here on the emulator and run it again. And we're going to see a different experience now. So now I'm going to type in my name again, Mark, log in, same functionality as before, everything's working as expected. What's my profile ID? We still have that. So we're going to go home, instance state was saved again, open another application, application was temporarily destroyed to free resources. And then we'll navigate back to the application that we were using before, and it looks the same now. However, this time when I click on what's my profile ID, I'm going to get that number again. So there it is, because we successfully saved it in the bundle for use later. Now you would expect an application to work like this, because as you noticed, as a user, I only minimized the application and then moved to another application. I didn't explicitly close it. So I want all that supplementary information to persist throughout the experience. And it would really impact the user experience if you didn't do that as a developer. So just always keep that in mind. Whenever you're implementing some supplementary information, in this case profile ID, to customize an activity, you have to save those variables. Otherwise, you're going to end up in some strange fringe cases for your application. But that's all I had for this lesson. I really appreciate your time watching, everyone. The next one's going to be on user preferences. So it's actually going to be quite similar to today's lesson, but you're going to be able to store data in hard memory for use later. But thanks for watching, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.